Hi, everyone. I'm just waiting a minute to begin. Okay. Hello. Welcome to Poetry Daily's third installation of Ecopoetry Now, a series celebrating poets from Canada, Mexico, and the US. My name is Sally Keith, and along with Peter Streckfuss, I serve as Poetry Daily's co-editorial director. The poets we feature this month, C.A. Conrad, Billy-Ray Belcourt, Maricela Guerrero, and Allison Hedge Coke, have shared and will share this coming Monday also poems, poetic statements, and reading lists highlighting their commitment to eco-poetry and the earth, as well as important local differences, including bioregion and native language. Unfortunately, C.A. Conrad is unable to be with us. We are, however, delighted to have the wonderful poet and translator Robin Myers here interpreting for Maricela. I'm very grateful to Brian Teare, poet, eco-poet, friend, professor at UVA, editorial board member for Poetry Daily, for agreeing to host these conversations and for his vision, time, and generosity. Before I begin, I want to briefly also thank anyone and everyone who's donated to Poetry Daily. As an independent nonprofit, we rely on part-time volunteers, dedicated workers, and one part-time managing editor. Your monthly support truly helps make Poetry Daily sustainable. Martin Mitchell, who is currently our managing editor, will link the donation page in the chat for anyone who may still be interested in helping out. Finally, I'm grateful to all of you for your support, for signing in and listening here as the semester ends. And I know the days are very, very busy. So thank you. And here's Brian.
Hi, everyone. I want to reiterate Sally's gratitude, and this time to sort of offer Sally her gratitude, and also Martin Mitchell, who's managing editor at Poetry Daily. I suggested an eco-poetry series to Poetry Daily, and it would not have been realized without their enthusiasm and their generosity and their collaboration and an immense amount of labor. So I just am really grateful to Sally and Martin for being so willing to put on what I think is a kind of ambitious and unique series, including all the fabulous people who are here today. And thank all of you people who are attending for coming and giving your time to these incredible writers. I am going to introduce each panelist in the order they'll present. Everyone will read or speak, contextualizing their work for about 10 minutes. Afterward, we'll open the floor for dialogue and then for a Q&A. We invite you to please put your questions in the Q&A. There will be amazing readings and much to think about. So hopefully you can, really offer a kind of generous inquiry to our panelists. Our first panelist is Billy-Ray Belcourt, a writer and academic from the Driftpile Cree Nation. He is an assistant professor in the creative writing program at the University of British Columbia. A 2018 Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation Scholar, he earned his PhD in English at the University of Alberta. He was also a 2016 Rhodes Scholar and holds a master's in women's studies from the University of Oxford and Wadham College. In the First Nations Youth category, Belcourt was awarded a 2019 Inspire Award, which is the highest honor the Indigenous community bestows on its own leaders. He is the author of 3 books, This World is a Wound, Indian Coping Mechanisms, Notes from the Field, and A History of My Brief Body. His 4th book, the novel, A Minor Chorus, will be published in the fall of 2022 by Hamish Hamilton in Canada and W.W. Norton in the US. Allison Hedge Coke, a California Arts Council legacy artist, Fulbright scholar, first Jade Nurtured Si Hui Female International Poetry Award recipient and U.S. Library of Congress Winter Binner Fellow, has written 7 books of poetry, most recently the book-length poem Look at This Blue, 1 book of nonfiction, and a play. Following former field worker retraining in Santa Paula and Ventura in the mid-1980s, she began teaching, and she is now a distinguished professor of creative writing at the University of California, Riverside. Maricela Guerrero is the author of 9 poetry collections. El Sueño de Toda Célula won Mexico's Clemencia Isaura Prize in 2018 and was just published by Cardboard House Press as The Dream of Every Cell in Robin Meyer's English translation. Cardboard House Press also published her book Kilimanjaro, translated by Stelina Villarreal in 2018. Guerrero has been a member of Mexico's prestigious national system of artists. Of course, what we have today is a natural system of artists before us. Her work has been translated into German, Swedish, and French. And lastly, Robin Meyers is a Mexico City-based poet and Spanish to English translator. Her latest book-length translations include the Book of Explanations by Teddy Lopez Mills, Copy by Dolores Dorantes, and The Dream of Every Cell by Maricela Guerrero. Other translations have appeared in Granta, the Baffler Kenyon Review, the Common Harvard Review, 2 Lines, Waxwing Asymptote, and elsewhere. She was among the winners of the 2019 Poems and Translation Contest. She is an alumna of the Vermont Studio Center, the Banff Literary Translation Center, the Community of Writers, and Under the Volcano. And I'm really honored to have these remarkable writers with us today. And our first presenter will be Billy-Ray Belcourt.
Hello, everyone. I'm Billy-Ray Belcourt. I'm from the Driftpaw Cree Nation in Northwest Alberta, which is Treaty 8 territory. And I live now, and I'm zooming in from the unceded and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I'm going to read 2 poems, including the poem that appeared on Poetry Daily, and then from the statement. Ode to Northern Alberta. Here, no one is birth, only pieced together. I tire myself out pretending to have a body. Everyone worships feelings they don't have names for, but no one is talking about it. Love is a burning house we built from scratch. Love keeps us busy while the smoke clears. History lays itself bare at the side of the road, but no one is looking. History screams into the night, but it sounds too much like the wind. Cree girls gather in the bush and wait for the future. In the meantime, they fall in love with the trees and hear everything. In the 1950s, my not yet Musham ran away from a residential school in Jussard, Alberta. As an adult, he kept coming back, despite knowing heaven is nowhere near here. This next poem is called An Entire Life, and it's in response to a series of paintings by the Cree artist Brenda Draney. When I said the instabilities of the self reveal the publicness of our emotions, what I meant was loneliness is a kind of season. It falls on us like rain. Maybe the body really is a necessary fiction. Once in a hospital room, my gallbladder malfunctioning, I saw the arc of my entire life, and there was an equal amount of joy and heartache. And yet somehow I still love the idea of an entire life. I was in a room with people who knew everything about me, and all I could think about was the burden of blue and the indistinctness of spring. There was so much I hadn't yet written down. Brenda, I've been meaning to tell you, my favorite invention is my mother. She believes in angels and second chances. I believe in the magnificence of a lake in northern Alberta and the radical possibilities of crying in public in front of strangers. What do you make of the aspen trees, by the way? Oh, how their leaves tremble even when the world is completely still. I, for one, am no different. And this is a short essay I wrote called Cree Ecopoetics. The Cree are an indigenous nation whose territories traverse much of what is now considered to be central and northern Canada. The earth isn't just a place, but also a shared subjectivity. It is possible to exist in a way that functions in contradistinction to the earth, and in so doing, cleave oneself from the metaphysical condition of earthliness. This is, of course, how racial capitalism works. One of the logics of colonialism is the desire to subjugate the earth as a form of white domination. In this calculus, indigenous life is made indistinct from the earth, thus seen to be violable, and land is transformed into property. In Cree epistemology, land is a sentient being. We are co-constituted with it. A Cree ecopoetics, in my mind, is a poetics of the land, a way of acknowledging the sovereignty of land and water and animal and plant life. In an unpublished poem, I write, "The lake is my ancestor, even if it will outlast me." The lake I'm referring to is called Lesser Slave Lake, the third largest body of water in Alberta and the site of several First Nations communities. Treaty 8 was first signed on its shores in 1899. The spirit and intent of treaty making from an Indigenous point of view had to do with ethical relationality and shared stewardship of the land. White settlers sent by a juvenile colonial government betrayed this spirit and configured treaty as a legal cessation of land. In order to carry this objective out, Cree people were corralled onto reserves, put into residential schools, starved, and pervasively surveilled by police and Indian agents. I think of these forms of quote unquote Indian policy as an anti-earth politics. The settler version of treaty, as well as the doctrine of discovery, made resource extraction possible. Northern Alberta is the site of the infamous oil sands. On the coast of Lesser Slave Lake, some of the Canadian government's most brutal forms of colonial oppression played out. I wonder what it means for a lake to be witness to all of it. In a way, that trauma is inscribed in the lake's ontological fabric. But more importantly, I see the lake as proof of my people's indomitability. The lake precedes the political project of Alberta, of Canada. It precedes the concept of the settler state. The lake has been and continues to be a locus of Cree livability. Every summer I stand at its shores, I feel like an indiscriminate part of the earth. That is what I think poetry affords us, Indigenous poets working in a time of white supremacist heteropatriarchal colonialism. A way of becoming the earth, a way of preserving and enacting something of our ancestors' ways of being and doing. A poem can be an uproarious reminder of the impossibility of settlement, of total conquest. As such, it is also a love song to the land. Thank you.
was going to share screen, but I put in the chat some links to a few of the more recent books, especially the one that just came out 6 weeks ago, Look at This Blue. But I want to say before I start that I'm here in residency at Playa, which is a residency for writers and artists and researchers in the first wildlife refuge of Oregon, founded in 1944, and have just been enjoying all of the birds and wildlife that are here in this territory, and want to pay respects to the people from here as well. So it's a beautiful place if you ever need a residency and a place to write from. This area is a playa lake, so seasonal lake where water comes onto an enormous lake bed that goes for miles and miles. And at the retreat center is a stream with the pond as well. I'm here on the Pacific Flyway where there's a lot of migratory birds at this time of year, but there's also muskrats and badgers and mule deer and such. So all thanks to the people from here and for Playa Lake as well. I wrote the essay that is posted with this session here in research residency, and I want to talk a little bit about that essay and also the new book that came out. So I'll read a little bit from the essay, but not all of it, and then a poem that is affiliated with the essay, and then talk briefly about the book. But the reading that Billy-Ray Belcourt just did was absolutely beautiful. So I also want to say thank you for that beautiful presentation, and for our host here, and for everyone that's attending. Thank you for being here. So here's a little bit from the essay. We are in the world, waking transcendent with light on lids holding dream life interior. First thought, remnant dream. Second, bird song, how many, who is singing. After, a look at light seeping through or reflecting through branch, whether water or tree. Maybe creatures there, what awaits. Within the world, with what place holds wakening. Movement like wood grain, like waterway, fluid, brings abundance, peace. By now, something may have formed already in the intersections of life, of living things, how we open into life, into day, or from chronicled events, from dream world still present from night. Realms and realms of reality present, a swarm of butterflies drinking from a cleft rock and river, dove's delight in fermented mulberry, an aspen 80,000 years old, people took for forest, a member of the mint family, each flower a hairy calyx with pointed sepals, tubular corona, 50 flowers might fit on a penny, hidden lake blue curls. The muskrat holds a branch above his head while swimming. Mergansers land nearby. Yesterday, 4 sandhills. Today, a blue heron, a rail, phoebe, vesper sparrow, kite. The marsh foregrounds, Playa Lake, sedge line, banks, cattails. The mud wasp nest has additional rows each storm. When I was small, teens taught me to sidestroke, mimicking picking strawberries and bringing them into basket. Through World War II, Dad said every time he saw a good black earth, all he could think of was a garden patch place. My horse's lean against my shoulder is all the love anyone needs in this world. So that's a bit of excerpt from the essay, and it was called We're in the World, and the poem affiliated with it is We Are in a World, and it's from streaming. The book just before this last one came out of poetry. We were in a world, in a world, in a world. Sure, we had our glyphs, but we were providential. Once some alphabet believers, glass purveyors, Arctos killers, sent all bailiwick on cursed course, far faster gyration backspin, burling intrinsic angular momentum, bosun melts, spinning, it careened away. Iceberg, 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 glacier brace, time traced yesterday, shakable base, all below, flushed alluvial torrent. Niagara pour, special spate, flux flow, until their coastal citadels moldered from cyclone, tsunami, hurricane gale. Tornadoes tossed turf wherever they pleased. Eruptions molded her back into something she deemed worthy, not to mention quakes, and the people pushed into cataclysm a few generations from alphabet book imposed catechism, soon were calamity, tragedy, storm splinters, fragmented particles of real past, in a world gone away from oratory, songs, oral literatures, orations, into gyrations reeling, some hot dying mangroves disappearing, Waima Bay, dengue fever, butterfly rain shift, metaphors gone, desert spring savanna, caribou, black guillemot, bat, frogs, snails gone. Where will sandhills crave? Winged late early, reefs bleach, rain, 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 snow, 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 fires, flaming fiercely, fascinated in their own reflecting glare. Marmots rise early, mosquitoes endure longer, lasting, biting, spreading, rest Nile. Polar bears quit bearing. Robins, swallows enter Inuit life. Thunder finds the Nupia, and here it was said that glyphs left a rock wall. Stone plates, bark, branch, leapt, animated into being, shook their shoulders and straightened the story, lifted world upon their wing, bone, soared into night, to place world, back into socket, east sky, stilled us. Some say the soup left over was worded language. Some say the taste lingers even now. And I just want to talk briefly about the new book. That's from streaming. This is a brand new release 6 weeks ago. Look at This Blue. It's a bookwork project that was brewing internally, the music of it for years and years and years. And I had another book due at my press, and I wasn't quite feeling it, and gave myself into the work that became Look at This Blue, and wrote it in a very mad frenzy, and just allowing myself to be with the poetry and let the poetry lead me. And the music of the poetry is very jazz-like oriented, improvisational. It's an assemblage poem and reads as a book-length poem, and was written in that same way. Some of the original pages are not included. I have a really brilliant editor, Erica Stevens at Coffee House Press, and followed her advice on what should stay and what should go from that draft. So Look at This Blue is out in the world. It is a love letter and an indictment of California, where I live, work, and teach in Tongva, Kauai, Serrano, and Luiseño lands at the University of California, Riverside. I have lived off and on in California since I did my former field worker retraining in the 80s. I have had several jobs in California over the years, and so the work has been culminating from my embracement of everything beautiful in the natural world and the state, but also the people in many forms of the state, and how many exterminations have happened in the animal life and plant life in the state, and how many massacres of people have occurred. So I'm just going to read a little brief excerpt. By the 6th, extinction translates to which way the wind blows. By the 7th, species are temporary, expendable. Nothing matches life. Abalone, White Point Conception to Punto Obrejos, marine snail, mollusk, spiral, sea ear, mother bull, albatross, short-tailed, soaring on long, narrow wings, pink-billed, tipped bluish beetle, Casey's June. Scarabs prefer alluvial fans, Sonoran desert scrub, beetle, Mount Hermon June. Scarabidae in sandy hills, Sante sandhills, butterfly, barren silver spot, upper golden, under brown, spotted silver-black butterfly, calliope silver spot, brushfoot, hairy basal wing, single annual flight, butterfly, El Segundo blue, lays on coast buckwheat flowers, pollen nurtured, butterfly, Lang's meadowlark, from riverine sand dune, buckwheat bound, butterfly, lotus blue, look at this blue, Palus Verdis blue, from the Palo Verdes Peninsula. One of the best claims to being the world's rarest butterfly, first thought extinct by development, rediscovered at the Defense Fuel Support Point in San Pedro, newly returned, lays eggs on deerweed. Notice the patterning on the underside of her wing, and remember along the way the murdered sow bear, her cubs taken for claws, were all just symptoms of something massive faster over. They're killing us, weaponizing nature, sanctifying arms, consecrating each trigger-flexed hand. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's such a delight to be here. Thank you so much to everyone at Poetry Daily who has made this beautiful event possible. And it's an honor for me to accompany my dear friend Maricela Guerrero, author of El sueño de toda célula, The Dream of Every Cell. I just wanted to mention that I will be interpreting for Maricela. I am not a professional interpreter, so thank you all for your patience. Gracias también a Maricela por su paciencia y por su complicidad siempre. Maricela, ¿estás en mute? Sí.
Listo. Ya se escucha así, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Bueno, pues buenas tardes a todos. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación a Allison. A Sally, escuché a Allison con mucha atención y con mucho gusto. Y a Billy. Y bueno, espero que tengamos una lectura muy amorosa y cuidadosa entre todos. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much to Sally for the invitation. It's a pleasure to get to hear Allison and Billy, and we hope that our reading will be loving and full of care.
Bueno, pues, reacciones metabólicas. Se trata de un tema de comunicación, agudezas de ingenio y oscuridad y luz e intranquilidad, transformación, producir azúcares sin resabios ni contaminantes. Un contaminante es una sustancia que excede sus niveles, es decir, que estaba ahí, aunque todo tiene un límite y si se sobrepasa, acontecen eventos no deseados, excesos de azúcar, de dióxido de carbono, de ácidos, de azufre, sulfatos, exceso de agua en los pulmones. No lo llamamos contaminación, pero parece. Inundaciones, diques, presas que ahogan pueblos, casas en nombres de compañías constructoras, mineras sustractivas, excesos. En todo caso, se trata, después de aclarar, de volver a acomodar y no siempre salir huyendo. Vamos en el lomo de una loba bosque arriba. Ahora voy detrás de algo o alguien que huye por los rápidos que se han formado en esta ciudad de terreno accidentado, y no es fluir, es solo ir persiguiendo, y ya no se trata de esto, que es angustia. Me quedo sin aire, solo persigo una forma, una presencia que me duele, una célula que se está quedando sin vida, que detiene su intercambio biomolecular y duele mucho. Sulfatos, sulfuros, cómo reducir el impacto de los excesos, de los venenos en las palabras, las cosas que dijimos, lo que terminamos haciendo, exceso de encono y mala voluntad, imaginación desaforada. Nos valdría más la realidad, la percepción de lo que hay. Esta tarde te veo así, en tu belleza celular, y descifro los excesos de las palabras, los colecciono, los acomodo. Hermosura en ebullición. Un deshuesadero de autos ordenados por colores, por formas, por fechas y por eventos catastróficos ocupan el lugar que les corresponde. Y sé que cada uno de ellos es una posibilidad de abrazarte, de serenar, de limpiar la biosfera. Percibo tu respiración, recuerdo tus palabras, los pasos vacilantes de tus primeras correteadas. Resistir y refrenar en mantos acuíferos, extraer los contaminantes, los excesos y ordenarlos. que la belleza de su exceso fulgure y se transforme en otra cosa, aquí cerca o tan lejos como el palmar de dátiles de Elche o el baldío de al lado. Pienso en ti y en las cosechadoras de jazmín, pienso en la forma en que dibujas, en que llevas el lápiz o la pluma, en que iluminas una orilla, en que trazas formas de hojas y árboles frutales. Percibo entonces todas las reacciones metabólicas de los billones de células de la loba que nos echa a su lomo y nos lleva bosque arriba. Respiramos juntos y la angustia es un animal que se echa a nuestro lado y duerme.
Metabolic reactions. It's about communication, keennesses of ingeniousness and darkness and volatility and light, transformation producing sugars without aftertaste or contaminants. A contaminant is a substance that exceeds threshold levels, which is to say, it was there, although everything has a limit, and if outstripped, undesired events transpire, excesses in sugar, in carbon dioxide, in acids, in sulfur, sulfates, excess water in the lungs. We don't call it contamination, but it seems to be. Floods, dikes, dams, drowning towns, houses in the name of construction companies, subtractive mining companies, excesses. In any case, it's about clarification after the fact, of putting things back in place and not just running for the hills every time. Let's ride on a she-wolf's back up the mountainside. Now I'm moving behind someone or something who's fleeing on the rapids that have surged in this city of uneven terrain. And it's not flowing, it's just chasing. And it's not about that anymore, which is to say anguish. I'm left breathless. I'm just chasing a shape, a presence that hurts me, a cell that's being left lifeless, that's halting its biomolecular exchange. And it hurts a lot. Sulfates, sulfides, how to reduce the impact of the excess poisons in the words, the things we said, what we ended up doing, an excess of spite and ill will, of frenzied imagination. We're more into the reality, the perception of what's there. This evening I see you this way, in your cellular beauty, and decipher the words excesses, collect them, arrange them, beauty a boil, a junkyard, cars organized by color, by shape, by date, and by catastrophic events, occupying the place that corresponds to them. And I know that each and every one is a chance to embrace you, to calm, to clean the biosphere. I perceive your breath, remember your words, the shifting steps of your first mad dashes, resisting and restraining in underlying aquifers, extracting the contaminants, the excesses, and arranging them. May the beauty of their excess gleam and be transformed into something else close by or as far away as the date palms of Elche or the vacant lot next door. I think of you and the jasmine harvesters. I think of how you draw, how you hold the pen or pencil, how you illuminate an edge where you sketch shapes of leaves and fruit trees. Then I perceive all the metabolic reactions, the billions of cells inside the she-wolf who nestles us onto her back and carries us up the mountainside. We breathe together, and anguish is an animal that curls up to us and sleeps. Estás en
Muchísimas gracias, Robin. Ya. Muchas gracias, Robin. Canis lupus signatus. A 8.700 kilómetros o 4.700 millas náuticas se encuentra un bosque ardiendo desde hace días. Un avión que iba a sofocar el incendio se estrelló y se hizo uno con las llamas. Eso dijeron las noticias. Ahí vivían familias de lobos, el Canis lupus signatus. En el reportaje está la foto de una madre lobo con sus cachorros trepándose en la espalda para llevarlos bosque arriba y regurgitar la carne que acababa de ir a cazar. En la siguiente fotografía, los cachorros tragan la masa sanguinolenta y suave que su madre les ha entregado. ¿De qué manera harán falta esos cachorros y su madre en el mundo? ¿De qué curiosa forma la introducción del fuego y los bomberos y los aviones sofocaincendios hubieran podido cambiar el rumbo de las familias de lobos de otras partes del universo.
Oops, I'll try again. Canis lupus signatus. 8,700 kilometers, or 4,700 nautical miles away, a forest has been blazing for days now. A plane sent to smother the fire crashed and became one with the flames. That's what the news said. In the forest lived families of wolves, Canis lupus signatus. The article shows a photo of a mother wolf with her pups clinging to her back so she could carry them up the mountainside and regurgitate the meat she'd just gone hunting for. In the next photo, the pups are gulping down the soft and bloody pulp their mother has delivered to them. How will those pups and their mother be missed in the world? In what strange way might the introduction of fire and firefighters and fire-smothering planes have been able to change the course of wolf families in other parts of the universe?
Mapa en 3D. Soñé que recibí un bosque en un mapa en tercera dimensión y podía verle sus cañadas, sus ríos, sus tipos de suelo, las transformaciones de sus componentes. Con el bosque llegaba un San Bernardo, me lamía y paseábamos por la maqueta en tercera dimensión, tamaño real. Olía a tierra de recién llovida y no había nadie. Recordé que mis hermanos y yo vimos miles de veces la película del San Bernardo que tocaba el piano y reímos mucho para evitar esa sensación de que los adultos habían sido sustraídos. Caminamos por el terreno y claramente hicimos un censo de árboles. A caballo dado no se le ve colmillo. Sin embargo, esos eucaliptos eran un problema para el San Bernardo y para mí. Venían solos, no traían koalas mamás ni koalas bebés, y a sus alrededores el suelo era un desastre de desnutrición y altos niveles de tristeza. El San Bernardo tomó la libreta y escribió la palabra endémico fosforeciendo. Me guiñó un ojo y luego fue la loba y se echó a correr con su manada por los mapas del bosque. De las semillas endémicas que el San Bernardo esparció por el mapa, brotaron árboles frondosos, ahuehuetes, encinos y miles de hierbas que dieron cobijo a liebres, zanates y otras aves como patos silvestres. En un momento me tendí en la tierra y de mí brotaron musgos, líquenes y hongos. Y así estuve hasta el presente. Células que provienen de otras células y contienen el mismo material hereditario, tus hermosos ojos y la risa.
3D map. I dreamed I received a forest on a 3D map, and I could see its gullies, its rivers, its types of soil, the transformations of its components. The forest came with a Saint Bernard. It licked my skin. We wandered through the life-sized mock-up in all 3 dimensions. It smelled like earth right after rain, and there was no one else around. Subtractions was the feeling of the Saint Bernard and mine. I remembered how my siblings and I watched the movie about the piano-playing Saint Bernard a million times and laughed a lot to stave off the feeling that the adults had been subtracted. We walked around the plot and clearly took a census of the trees. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. And yet those eucalypti were a problem for the Saint Bernard and me. They were alone. They bore no mother koalas or baby koalas, and the soul all around them was a catastrophe of malnutrition and high grades of sorrow. The Saint Bernard took the notepad and wrote the word endemic, glowing. He winked at me, and then he was the she-wolf who ran off with her pack into the forest mats. From the endemic seed sown by the Saint Bernard sprouted lush trees, oaks, and ahuehuetes, and countless herbs that sheltered hares, rooks, and other birds like wild ducks. Eventually, I lay down on the earth, and mosses, lichen, and mushrooms bloomed from me, and that's how I stayed until the present. Cells that come from other cells and harbor the same hereditary material, your beautiful eyes and laughter.
Muchísimas gracias a todos por estar aquí en esta lectura. Muchísimas gracias, Robin, por tu hermosísima traducción. A Cardboard House por haber editado el libro, a todos los aquí presentes. Muchísimas gracias. Por último, preguntas. ¿Escribimos poemas para preservar la especie? ¿Escribimos poemas y trazamos rutas para transmitir una información que muestre cómo seguir la vocación de alegría, luciérnagas, bacterias luminosas, echarse al lomo de la loba bosque arriba? Detener es otra forma de fluir.
Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today, and thank you to Cardboard House Press for publishing this book. Muchísimas gracias, Maricela, por todo. And we will end with the poem Questions. Do we write poems to save the species? We write poems and map routes to convey information that teaches us to follow joy as a vocation. Fireflies, luminous bacteria. To nestle against the she-wolf's back on the mountainside. To stop is another way to flow. Gracias.
So I always feel a little speechless after those readings. Thank all of you for all the work that you've done and continue to do. What I'm going to do now is ask a question that hopefully will sort of give everyone some dialogue. And then I also want to invite at this moment everyone from the audience to, if you're curious, if you have questions, to put a question in the Q&A. Allison, Billy-Ray, Robin, Maricela, if you would kind of join, turn on your video and join, that would be awesome. And Martin will spotlight you. Thanks. I really wanted to just acknowledge the ways in which all of you balance so beautifully what Maricela calls joy as a vocation, a kind of acknowledgement, a celebration, a kind of acknowledgement of connection, with a lot of, at the same time, critique and condemnation of violence, of colonialist policies, of extractive policies. And I am struck in all of your work by the kind of constant balance of these two impulses of celebration, of acknowledging connection, and also calling out and condemning violence. And I wonder if you could speak, all of you have such different kinds of poetic forms. Some of you, Billy-Ray, you favor in your books of poems, like shorter, more direct poems. Allison, your poems tend to be sprawly, a little bit longer lined. And you also have this recent book-length poem, Maricela. This recent book is also a book-length poem. So I'm wondering if you could talk about this sort of balance between condemnation and joy, this sort of acknowledgement of connection, and also the sort of critique of violence. How do you do that in your work? How do you think about it as a writer? How do you hold it formally? It's such a powerful tension in all of your work, and so beautifully done in such different ways. And go in whatever order you like. Just speak when you feel moved to.
I'll say, because the new book is out so recently, I was thinking about this specific thing. For me, when you really love someone, something, someplace. You love it, accept it, sometimes in a way that also does have a conditional factor, no matter how deep the love, and you always want it to be the best it can be. So calling to accountability for a loved one that you cherish is inherent to that love, to that feeling. I'm feeling very emotional saying this, and it's the same when you're in a place and you're watching these, witnessing this destruction and knowing the history of the destruction, and it's every minute, every day. So to not call to accountability is to not see, to not be within, to not have place, and to not cherish. So for me, they're inherent. One doesn't exclude the other. It comes together just like family.
Amazing, thank you. Billy-Ray, I see you nodding.
Yeah, just thoughts formulating in my brain. For me, poetry is about living, which means it is also about freedom. And there's so much that impedes and actively targets Indigenous freedom, queer freedom, trans freedom, and so forth, that a poem has to, or at least I want my poems to be able to zero in on both conditions of possibility and impossibility, and to sort of inhabit that zone of paradox. But I also think of Fred Moten, who said, anybody who thinks that they can understand how terrible the terror has been without understanding how beautiful the beauty has been against the grain of the terror is wrong. So much of public discourse about Indigenous life, both in Canada and the US, is about our conditions of suffering without bringing into focus the source of that suffering, the culprits, the terrible history. And so I see it as my job to engender some kind of discourse of Indigenous joy and desire that allows for us to articulate some kind of politics of futurity with one another. It's a collective project.
Amazing, thank you.
Maricela.
Bueno, pues para mí la poesía es un espacio de libertad que me permite tratar de encontrar formas de resolver ciertos conflictos, pero pues cada vez me estoy dando cuenta de lo insistentes que son los conflictos y de lo precario que es mantener el equilibrio, ¿no? En realidad, solo disfruto escribir y trato de que eso esté allí en el poema, ¿no?
Maricela says, I see poetry as a space of freedom and a way to address certain conflicts, although at the same time I feel increasingly aware of how persistent those conflicts truly are. And writing is something I love, and it's important to me that that can be felt in what I write.
Thank you all so much. I also wanted to point to another consistency across your bodies of work, which is also a kind of grounded embodiment. All of you write very beautifully about being material beings in the world and the kind of layered complexity of what it means to be a material being in the world. by which I mean the kind of ecological context for being a being, but also the social context of being a being, the historical context of being a being. And also as all of you are kind of marking, the joys of that, the kind of violence of that. And I wonder, for you as writers, are there other writers, as you've suggested, Billy-Ray, often these efforts that we're involved in are community efforts, whether Indigenous, queer, feminist, etc. What are the writers who kind of sustain a kind of, or joy, not just writers, artists who sustain a kind of joy and connection and embodiment for you? Who do you look toward right now in particular, as you know, as you're saying, Maricela, the violence often seems to be accelerating and accumulating at a very quick pace. And as you said, Allison, it's impossible not to kind of witness that as a being. And so I'm wondering who's really sustaining you these days as a body on this planet. I like that you're smiling, Allison. Does that mean you have a good or have an answer?
It means that I'm thinking about so many, so many in which to say. And while I'm thinking about them, their work is resonating with me. Quincy Troupe just published a book called Duende, and it's about 56 years of his poetry, which is phenomenal. And so much is covered in that volume. And Arthur Z's The Glass Constellation is, I think, maybe 45 years or close to 50 of his work as well. And both include so many things that are so essential, but also always Linda Hogan, Lian Hao, Shun Bitsui. There are certain people's work that I just go to constantly. And when I was young and starting, Gloria Bird's work, whose Spokane was deeply meaningful to me and remains so, even though she hasn't continued to publish. But there's so many more. So I'm at a quandary of who to list. There's just so many wonderful people doing phenomenal work in the world. Billy-Ray mentioned Fred Moulton, who was a colleague at Riverside and another wonderful, incredible thinker. Yeah, so just smiling for the joy of knowing about these people. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Billy-Ray, do you have folks you'd like to add to that list?
Yeah, I'm thinking of just putting links in the chat of a couple.
Oh, sweet.
Cree artists from who belong or whose communities are on the shore of Leicester Slave Lake, whose work I think is about the confluence of grief and beauty, which is what I think my work is also about. And that, unsurprising to me, that we're all from the same place. we all grew up on the same shoreline in the same forest. And of course, I'm thinking also in terms of embodiment and writing that begins in the body. I think of Layli Long Soldier's work, who offers us that frame of thought, which is that Indigenous existence is so much thought so much as a kind of footnote, and she's trying to write us into the body of text, but also back into our bodies. Yeah.
No, that's great. And I love pointing to this sort of tension as writers that we often have to acknowledge, of the tension between our material bodies and language as a discursive site, in the way that discursivity also plays such a strong role in embodiment in Western culture. So I appreciate that tension, and the way Layli's work acknowledges that tension too. It's important. Maricela?
Que si hay escritores, artistas de otras disciplinas a quienes
Sí.
acudas.
Hola, bueno, pues pienso siempre en el poema del Yeti de Szymborska, en el cual vamos a hacer un recuento de todas las desgracias del mundo, pero también dice, tenemos a Shakespeare y tenemos la música, ¿no? Para mí, bueno, además de la poesía está la música, está el baile, está pues también esta vocación de alegría que se encuentra en la amistad, en la comunicación con otros, ¿no? De no ser por ello, bueno, nos iríamos totalmente al abismo y a las catástrofes y a la negatividad. Y bueno, pues es lo que tenemos por ahora para seguir resistiendo, ¿no?
Maricela thinks often of Wisław Szymborska's famous poem about the Yeti, which kind of lists all of the human horrors and yet turns at the end to, well, we have Shakespeare and we have music. And so music in itself, dancing also, the other joy as a vocation to be found in friendship, in the relationship with others, without which it would be all abyss, all catastrophe.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. I think it's a good place to end too, because you guys today have really staved off the abyss for another hour together. So I really appreciate everything that you have brought to us today. Really moving. Yeah, in the context of everything that's happening right now. So I can't